Hi, everybody. Welcome to Eye on Oshkosh. I'm Cheryl Hentz, your host, and we're continuing our election coverage on this edition. I have with me to my right Senator, yes, you wish, right? Gordon Hintz, our state representative from the 54th Assembly District. He's the Democratic candidate. He is the incumbent, and he is running for another term. And seated to my left is his challenger. And surprisingly enough, it's not a Republican candidate. We have a Libertarian candidate with us tonight. His challenger is Jordan Hansen, and we are very pleased to welcome you to the show as well. So thanks to you both for being here. The election is on Tuesday, November 8th. You don't have to wait until then to vote. Early voting is already undergoing all over the place. If you're in doubt as to where or when or how you can vote or what you need in order to vote, check with your local clerk's office, whether it's a city clerk or a town clerk, whatever. Check with your clerk and find out precisely what you need to do. But the main thing is to go vote. So as we get started, I just want to ask each of you to, not just give yes or no answers, but don't ramble forever either. We've got a lot of questions, both of my own and from viewers. Want to try and get through as many of them as possible. And feel free to interact with each other. Just no Donald Trumpish stuff.
Wrong.
So anyway, let's start with each of you giving a brief description and a brief introduction of yourself, and tell us why you're running for state representative. Gordon, do you want to go first since you're the incumbent?
Sure, absolutely. Since the first time I ran, I've run to be an advocate for Oshkosh and a voice for opportunity for everyone in Wisconsin. And your motivation to serve is kind of shaped by what's happening. And I think too many of the decisions being made in Madison, especially the last few years, have been more on behalf of special interests and been out of touch with a lot of the challenges that everyday people face in the state. We've sort of expanded taxpayer-funded vouchers, not based on whether it was good policy, but really being driven by the largest spending election special interest group in the state right now. We gave 11 people that make over $35 million, $21 million in tax cuts, yet we couldn't give a dollar to the UW system. We held funding for the K-12 education largely flat. We have bills written by mining companies, lead paint companies, payday lenders, debt collectors, all sort of on the behalf of those interests, and it is become all too common. And I think a lot of the frustration we're seeing in the national campaign is just as much in the state of Wisconsin. And I'm doing my best to try to curb that and get us focused on real challenges that we face.
Okay, great. Jordan?
Oh, I'm running to fight for liberty. I think that our country and our state is being deprived of liberty. People's individual freedoms are being taken away at rapid rates. And I'm fighting for everybody's liberty, from gun rights to gay rights. I care about everybody's freedom, no matter how controversial it is. But the real focus of my campaign is criminal justice reform, from getting people out of prison that don't belong there to getting rid of a lot of bad laws on the books that aren't punishing a harm or some kind of victimless crime. I want to reform our criminal justice system and try to get more peaceful streets, I think, more freedom, more economic freedom. It's all tied together between individual freedom and economic freedom. It's all the same thing. So that's the focus of my campaign.
All right. When you say rights are being taken away, other than the discussion about gun rights, what other kinds of rights do you feel are being taken away?
Well, the way I look at rights don't come from government. Rights are natural, they're innate, they're in us as human beings. They're part of our essence as human beings. And over time, government takes away our rights. I have a natural right to try marijuana if I want to. And the government's taken away that right long ago. It's taken away at times our rights to consume alcohol if we want. Of course, we repealed prohibition, but we still have prohibition for people under 21. So by take away rights, I'm talking about really any kind of activity that isn't a harm to others or isn't causing a harm to others or putting people in immediate jeopardy that we're no longer allowed to do or can't do without being penalized for it.
Okay, all right. Okay, so what do each of you see as the three biggest issues facing Wisconsinites? And why don't we start with you, Jordan?
Well, our criminal justice system is one of those things, and this is a nationwide issue, but we're putting people in prison at ridiculous rates. The United States has about 4 or 5% of the world's population, but 25% of the world's prison population. That's a huge problem. a lot of these people are there for victimless crimes. 22% of the population is there for nonviolent offenses. And nobody that's nonviolent should really be in prison. I mean, maybe some jail sentences for some of these people, but if you haven't hurt anybody, I don't see a reason why you need to be locked up for more than a year. So criminal justice reform, trying to change interactions with police. I think we're over-policing a lot of things, and I think that's causing a lot of confrontations that end up turning violent. Over 1,000 people a year are killed by police, and it's very controversial whether these are justified or not, but I think it's clear that many of them aren't justified, and I think we could reduce these by changing the way that police tactics are done, and well, that kind of sums up criminal justice reform, but a big part of that is marijuana legalization. This is happening. This is a thing. We can try to hold back and try to stay behind the curve as long as we can, but I think that's really foolish. I think we can pull a lot of tax revenue in that'll really help the state budget. I think it's a freedom issue, obviously. The last big thing that Wisconsin's facing right now is probably budget issues. I think we should be cutting taxes and cutting regulations and letting the economy grow naturally on its own. And in the process, we should be cutting federal state spending. Excuse me. Mm-hmm. We need to get government out of people's lives. It'll reduce the cost that government have to assume, which will reduce the tax burden on taxpayers. So.
Okay, Gordon.
Well, the biggest sort of unaddressed, issue that is, on the table being discussed is paying for transportation infrastructure. We have the third worst roads in the country. We are at the highest level of borrowing that we've ever had for transportation. About 20 cents of every dollar we spend is going to pay debt service. And infrastructure is kind of one of the big three items that really have an impact on our economy. And so, from a policy standpoint, that issue is going to be important. The other one is demographics. We are facing not just like a skilled worker gap, but we have a labor shortage. There aren't enough people 18 to 55, and that's not anybody's fault. That's just sort of the demographics, the lay of the land. We have an older population, but when you hear employers say, we can't get anybody, we're having a hard time, the only people we can find are, they can't pass a drug test. I mean, that's because we have a shortage of people. And you're really going to see it as, if we meet here 5 years from now, we're going to be a lot more retired people and a lot fewer working age people. And so we have to figure out, one, how we're going to maintain quality of life to make this a desirable place for people to continue to want to live and locate and look at what our advantages are. But it also impacts things like our state workforce, and we're already seeing the shortage there. And the last one kind of tied to that is what is our economic future? Because the worker shortage is going to drive up labor costs, and that's going to put more pressure on companies to maybe think about going to other countries. And we need to do everything we can to figure out where our new jobs are going to come from. And we know that a large number of them after 2020 are going to require, higher education degree.
Okay. All right. I definitely want to talk about jobs and job creation and, the workforce and so forth. But you brought up about, highways, transportation, infrastructure, that kind of thing. One of the questions from a viewer is, what are your plans, and this is for both of you, related to transportation in Wisconsin, including highways and mass transit?
I guess Alan will alternate. First off, you want to have a multi-year plan. What are our 6-year plans of needs in terms of, projects, existing, maintenance and reconstruction, and then looking at some of the big projects and, what it would take to, pay for those. One of the things that we're seeing is expenses have gone up, but revenue has gone down. People are driving less. Those that are driving more fuel-efficient cars. And, as a result, tax revenue has declined. I think we have to get over the idea that borrowing and kicking, money, paying for things in the future is more fiscally responsible than actually paying it today. And that's kind of one of the challenges that we're at. One of the things that I've heard recently is because we have big projects like the 441 interchange and the Milwaukee Zoo interchange, as well as I-39 outside of Madison is, well, if you did a gas tax increase, you could do it to cover those projects and then sunset it, and come up with a way to figure out, stretching out what were actual priorities and what were mandatory, to get done going forward. But I think, there aren't enough little things that people highlight that are going to save the money needed to really fund these things responsibly.
Sure. Jordan, what are your plans related to transportation and mass transit?
Well, indexing the gas tax to inflation is the one tax increase that I'm willing to entertain if it's done properly, but I would only entertain it if it had a sunset clause in it. The way I look at transportation is that we've got, kind of like you said, we've got a bunch of major projects going on right now, and it's partially because Democrats for 30 years kicked the can down the road in the 70s, 80s, and 90s with road infrastructure, and we've gotten to a point where we've got deteriorated roads that were built in the 50s that aren't getting, haven't been repaired in decades. But we've got a lot of major projects like the Zoo interchange, like the 441 interchange. But once those projects are done, about 20 years, not just those projects, but 94, 39, once these major projects are done, we're not going to have a lot of major projects after that, which is where the gas indexing with the sunset clause comes in, because once those are done, then we can turn our attention to just repairing roads in place. We're not adding capacity, we're not adding lanes, we're not changing dimensions that requires more property, we're not adding a bunch of flyovers and stuff like that. We're just repairing and replacing in place. And then we can turn to the more local road, the infrastructure that has really, really been neglected. Things like the Winneconne Bridge. That's been there since the 30s. It's finally going to be replaced in the next couple of years. But those kind of projects have been put off for a long time, and then we can turn to those. But it's difficult when you've had 30 years of kicking the can down the road that's led up to this point.
Right. Is it fair, though, Jordan, to blame Democrats all for that? I mean, just earlier this year, Governor Walker himself delayed a bunch of road construction projects. So, and he's not a Democrat.
I agree. I mean, he delayed some projects that really shouldn't have been delayed. But the fact of the matter is, if we would have spaced out these projects over the last 30 years, I mean, the Zoo interchange should have been redone 20 years ago. It's been subpar for a very long time. It was designed with 55 miles an hour in mind, and that's not what's it's not the situation anymore, and hasn't been for some time. But it's been poor leadership. There was a lot of anti-road leadership in the state for a long time, from the 60s through the 90s, that really, really hurt Wisconsin's infrastructure. And it wasn't just not repairing and replacing roads, it was not building new ones. We've had a rash of new construction from Highway 26, from Janesville up to Watertown, to 10 all the way to Marshfield, 45 upgrades, things like that, that should have happened a long time ago and didn't. So Republicans are to blame partially for this too. Walker probably shouldn't have delayed those projects, but it's a complicated issue.
Sure.
So.
Gordon, how do you feel about the delay in some of these projects that Walker did?
Well, the first thing I always say is I'm really happy we got Highway 41 done here in Oshkosh.
Yes.
So
Yes.
I'm going to take credit for that. Obviously, that was sort of the decision. I think that even among some of my Republican colleagues, there was support to address the issue. Just the governor was sort of the major obstacle, and I think people didn't want to take a vote if he was going to veto it. But I think we got to, maybe this time we get enough votes so we can override the governor's veto. I mean, delaying it again just drove up the cost of these projects because the cost of the projects will go up. You'll end up borrowing more. And it makes it a significant inconvenience, in one part of the state over the other part of the state. Either way, someone's going to be negatively impacted. I'm glad that 441 has only been delayed, I think, a year from what it was originally supposed to be. But I mean, again, it's not going away. We had a study in 2011, and they made their report, and of course, it had a lot of difficult choices. It wasn't really politically palpable, and so we didn't do anything. And, you get elected to govern and make tough decisions. And I don't think, until we get a new governor, I don't think we're going to do anything.
Okay. You had talked earlier about the workforce and so forth. So let's talk about jobs. Governor Walker, of course, pledged in his first bid for office that he was going to create 250,000 new jobs. And here he is. Much later, and he still hasn't even reached that goal, I don't think. So, and yet we do have a worker shortage when it comes to certain skilled labor and that kind of thing. So what do we do? How do we get over that hump and solve that problem?
It's going to be a balance of, quality of life, meaning people want to be here for a clean environment, for good schools, for safe cities, places to live. Affordability is going to be an issue, and I think that's something that Wisconsin can market itself as. We're at a disadvantage for climate, and that's how the whole country has kind of been transformed in terms of people moving to the southeast and to the southwest. We're certainly not alone, but we've got to build off what we've done well in this state. If you look at Milwaukee's really developed being sort of a hub for water, with the Great Lakes Water Institute, and some of that's been investment that we've done in UW-Milwaukee, kind of build off that as a hub. And up here, I think we're trying to build off that in terms of the aviation industry. There's been some work with the East Central Regional Planning Commission, the county and the city, and Go EDC with the new aviation park that we're starting out there. And up in Appleton, Gulfstream has more than, I think, tripled in size. And so I think, focusing on some areas where we can have a cluster, to make sure we have the jobs and then getting them here. But when you look at the job growth rate, if we had enough people 18 to 55, we probably would be closer to, some of the reason our job growth rate isn't what it was is that we're short the actual people to be able to fill the jobs.
Okay.
It's not just skilled labor, it's unskilled labor too. I work at Quad Graphics, and we've been experiencing a labor shortage for a couple of years now, especially getting into our busy season. We hire a lot of temps. They bus temps from temp agencies from Milwaukee up to Lamira. So it's really all over the market that we have a labor shortage. And I think a lot of that is taxes. Property taxes in Wisconsin are astronomical. Our property taxes in eastern Wisconsin, when you look at maps, they county by county, they color code property taxes. You see all these major cities that are red, and then the entire eastern half of Wisconsin is red. We're on par with Chicago and Cleveland and New York City for property taxes, and it's killing businesses. It's making people want to move away. People don't want to move here. Taxes are just driving away people left and right that we need to help our economy. So I think getting rid of taxes and lowering taxes and decreasing regulations to promote job growth are strategies that'll work for promoting and improving our economy.
Of course, on the other side of that, hey, I'm all for lower taxes. I don't know of anyone who wouldn't be, but when we've got a college system, a state college system that relies on taxes. We've got K through 12 education that relies on taxes, and we have to use taxes for our roads and so forth. We're already in the past, we've experienced shortfalls. We've got a governor who's delayed road projects because of budgetary issues. If we cut more taxes, where does the additional money come from to do any of the things that we're currently doing, much less anything more?
I'd like to start with abolishing the WEDC on the spot. Day one, I'll introduce legislation to abolish the WEDC.
Explain what that is for viewers.
Well, the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation is a state-run corporation that gives out money to different businesses and corporations that apply for it as grants to increase capacities, things like that, in the hopes that they'll make more jobs. I can't say that it's been wildly successful, unfortunately, and it's spent a lot of money doing a whole lot of nothing. So day one, I'd like to get rid of that. I don't know how far a vote will go, but it wishful thinking at least. But I'd like to start with corporate welfare. Corporations shouldn't be getting taxpayer dollars. It's one thing if you win a contract to build a road, but you shouldn't be getting handouts. You shouldn't be getting tax loopholes. I'm all for lowering taxes for everybody, but it should be for everybody, not just for some people. There shouldn't be loopholes. But then going to more spending cuts, I think we should move things to the private sector as much as possible. It's really the main places where I would want to go.
Okay, all right.
I would just like to add that we have cut taxes in this state. Unfortunately, we've given them to the top 1%. 77% or $161 million of the man and ag tax cut, went to people who make over $1 million a year. That's who's, received the benefits of the tax cuts in this state. Meanwhile, to pay for that, we cut funding to K-12 education, and a record number of school districts like Oshkosh have increased property taxes because they wanted good schools. So what's happened at the state level is As Republicans at the state level cut funding for education, communities across the state like Oshkosh are raising their own property taxes, and we do have a high property tax burden. Obviously, voters overwhelmingly felt that the trade-off between higher taxes but good schools was one they were willing to go on the side of good schools. But even on November 8th, there are additional school districts. I mean, we've got a record level that are going to referendum to make up for cuts at the state level. And so I think people need to understand the trade-off. Are we going to continue to give away tax money to people that make over $35 million a year and then ask local property taxpayers to largely pay for those tax cuts? Or are we going to get a more sensible policy that invests in important things that benefit everybody in the state, like public education and the UW system?
Well, and here in Oshkosh, in the last 8 to 10 years, I believe we've approved at least 3 referendums that I can think of. So hopefully we won't see another one.
Yeah, well,
anytime
one
soon,
building,
but
but
one
the
was
other
just
2 were
recent.
just to pay to keep the lights on, just to
Yes.
pay for teachers, you know, just to keep us, you know, up to par with some of our neighboring districts.
Right, right. Still kind of along the lines of jobs here. The current minimum wage is $7.25. That's hardly a living wage. I guess if someone is you know, working a part-time job in high school or even picking up some extra income when they're in college, that may not be bad. But if you're trying to support a family or subsidize a one family member income, that really doesn't go very far. What do each of you feel the minimum wage should be? And what will you do if you're elected, or in your case,
Sure.
re-elected, to try and move it to that
Well,
direction?
I've been a co-sponsor of legislation to increase the minimum wage to $10.10 over the next 3 years. It's got considerable backing from some Nobel laureate economists who have studied the issue, and we've got plenty of examples around the country where both municipalities and states have increased the minimum wage. It has increased the disposable income of individuals who then spend that money in the economy. And while there has been some costs, businesses, especially like restaurants and other retailers, have said they've had lower turnover and lower training costs because people are willing to stay in the jobs. And as we see more lower wage jobs, especially in the retail sector, you know, I think it's important that these jobs pay money. We know there's more than 300,000 people in the state that would benefit from a minimum wage increase, and that 80% of them are over the age of 35 years. So it's not just kids that we're talking about, which is often brought up. But the other thing that I'd like to say is we have regional markets around the state, and we used to have, prior to the last minimum wage increase, which I think took place in 2005 or 6 before I was in the legislature, they increased the minimum wage. But they got rid of the ability of local governments to have their own, you know, to have a separate wage increase, you know, and I think when you look at like Madison, Milwaukee, they might be able to increase their minimum wage higher or faster based on their own labor characteristics, their own cost of living. But in other parts of the state, you know, where, you know, it might be harder for them to do that, or, you know, I think California raised theirs statewide, and I think that was crazy, especially at the level that they did. Some places are going to be able to absorb it better, and it's going to, you know, fit better. But the bill that I support also returned that local control, which has kind of been increasingly under attack, to allow communities and regions to better address, you know, their economic challenges.
Okay. Jordan, what do you think the living wage or the minimum wage should be? And if you're elected, what will you do to get it there?
I don't think there should be a minimum wage. I think the market should set prices for labor. The fact of the matter is, I think less than 4% of jobs are paid minimum wage in this country, at least the 725, where it's at 725. Nobody's actually making minimum wage. They're all making some amount more than that. But here, we talked about the labor shortage earlier. In the last year and a half, I've had 2 wage increases that weren't related to performance. They were related to starting wage increases that caused compression. So, you know, we got raises. You know, I'm making substantially more than the minimum wage. I'm making more than what you want to raise the minimum wage to. And we're hiring. I don't want to, you know, make a big plug for, you know, for anybody here, but, you know, we're hiring. There are jobs available. There are good jobs available, especially this time of year. And this is where you get into a place very easily, and you can stay on. You can make a career out of it. but it's not going to be a white-collar, sit-at-a-desk job. You're going to work with your hands. You're going to work hard. But the jobs are available, and with our labor shortage, wages are going up. That's how an economy should work.
Okay. Any thoughts on that? Or?
No, I mean, one of the benefits I think we've seen over the last year, as we've had a national economic recovery a little slower in Wisconsin, but there's been some lagging on the wage standpoint. I think finally in the last year, I think a lot of it has to do with the labor shortage. We have seen wages, go up, and I think that's part of the challenge we have for some of our manufacturers out there is they'll say, well, I can't find anybody. I'm offering $11 an hour, but if they're going to have maybe some labor cost issues if they raised it to the level necessary to get somebody to actually work there. So
okay, all right. Well, health insurance is certainly at the front of a lot of people's minds and has been for some time. I think it's a very real possibility that if Republicans are elected into the White House and the Congress, that we are going to see the Affordable Care Act overturned in some fashion. I don't know what exactly they'll do, but they might repeal the whole thing.
Does anybody know what Donald Trump will do?
No, I don't even think he knows what he's going to do. But it's a very real possibility that it could be repealed completely, and that would leave millions of people without insurance, many with pre-existing conditions where they're not able to get coverage, and many of those people are our neighbors and friends and family here in Wisconsin. So if that happens, do either of you have a plan for what we can do on a statewide basis to get folks covered, not have them not getting coverage because of pre-existing conditions, and so forth? And why don't we start with you, Jordan?
Well, I mean, Badger Care was a pretty good model, wasn't it? I'd like to privatize healthcare as much as possible, but Badger Care worked for what it was doing before Obamacare came around, and I think Badger Care would continue to work if Obamacare is repealed. But ultimately, I'd like to see people get out of the welfare system. I don't want to force people out that can't support themselves, but I think letting our economy improve, getting rid of regulations, and letting our economy improve, getting better jobs, and getting people into those jobs will ultimately be the best thing that we can do, the best course of action, because welfare states aren't sustainable. We're increasingly adding more money to our debt, and we need to get past that. We need to get past the welfare binge that we're on of all kinds, corporate and for the poor. So really, to me, it's about getting past the issue of, well, how do we get people insured and let the market take care of it and get people out of the welfare system.
So Badger Care still is in effect
Yes.
in Wisconsin in some cases for folks. Would it be your contention then that we should do away with Badger Care?
In time, probably not in my lifetime, but in time, certainly. It's working now, but it ultimately won't work. We can't keep borrowing money. We can't tax people into oblivion. It doesn't work. You can't tax yourself into prosperity. These welfare measures are feel-good measures, and they're ultimately going to fail us someday. So,
Badger Care is a feel-good measure?
it's a feel-good. It's a patch on the problem. The problem is that we've got a lot of poverty, and the poverty's been created by poor economic policy and by government regulations. And we need to reverse that trend. We need to have an economy that works, and we start by I keep going back to this. We start by doing that. We start doing that by getting lowering taxes and getting rid of a lot of regulations. If we can get people off of welfare and into good jobs, we'll see people live happier lives, and we won't need all these welfare programs. The private sector will be able to handle these welfare needs.
Okay, Gordon?
I mean, a lot of what we are going to do in healthcare is going to be dependent on what happens in Washington. I think there are a lot of fixes that need to be made to the Affordable Care Act, but obviously things like pre-existing conditions, 26-year-olds on family coverage are become important staples that I think people need to rely on. One of the things that we have failed on in Wisconsin is we haven't taken the Medicaid expansion money, and if we had taken those dollars, we could have provided 80,000 more people with affordable health insurance. while saving the state $400 million every 2 years. So we could have absorbed the entire UW system cut while providing more coverage. So in what was probably one of the worst budget decisions, and even though Republicans in Michigan, Indiana, and Iowa were able to take the Medicaid money, in Illinois and Minnesota did the same as well, we're sort of on an ideological island. And so that will still be an option for us next year. I think we should look at doing that. So with Medicaid reimbursement rates, which you're going to hear about as an issue more, we have the second lowest reimbursement rate for people on Medicaid. So when somebody on Badger Care goes to the hospital, it doesn't pay for their full cost, and then it shifts to private insurance, covering that. And so the rest of us, end up paying more. And so I think taking the reimbursement money, looking at using part of that to increase reimbursement rates, but then managing, long-term costs to the extent that we can. Part of the challenge is going to be with an aging population. There's going to be higher needs, as a state, and we're in better shape than a lot of states because we have a really pretty competitive private insurance market, and to the extent that we can maximize that to, expand access, especially in rural areas, I think we need to do so. But it's, I remember 10 years ago we had more discussions about, state health care, but it's really shifted, and the relationship and the partnership really does depend on what the federal government does now. And the whole Medicaid relationship has been, based on, federal government, pays 2 to 1 in Wisconsin for every dollar you spend. So they've made it, they've incentivized providing coverage, and Wisconsin has benefited from that.
Okay. Along the same lines of health care, Planned Parenthood had money taken away from it, in this last year or two, maybe even longer ago. Time is flying by so fast here. But they've had money taken away from them, primarily because a few clinics, and I do mean a few, performed abortions. And people voted their conscience about abortion in taking away the money. Was that a fair decision? And how do we undo what has already been done, or don't we?
Well, I think this has been, an outrageous attack, given that the one thing that we've really noticed is when they closed the Planned Parenthood clinic in Fond du Lac, guess what? There was no one else to provide those services, no one else to provide the cancer screenings, no one else to provide low-income health care to the women who needed it, without Planned Parenthood being there. I mean, it's been closed for 2 years now, and nothing has replaced it. We have an Oshkosh clinic that serves an increasingly, large region, but the majority of the work that Planned Parenthood does won't be done otherwise. We've seen that happen in Texas, and the exact opposite thing that some of the people who are pushing for this, this attacks on Planned Parenthood. You're seeing more people, Google searches for things like self-induced abortion, higher rates of maternal mortality in places where there's been cutbacks on these clinics. And so it's really short-sighted, and the demonization and the back and forth, I think, doesn't solve any problems. And the state needs to get back what's the best way for us to continue to partner with groups like Planned Parenthood to serve the underserved in all parts of the state. They're who does it. And I've had these fights with the Department of Health Services saying, they always said, oh, someone will come fill in the role, and they haven't.
Right, right. Well, we're fortunate here in Oshkosh, but that's not the case, as you
That's right.
said, in other places. Jordan?
Well, I'll go back to my comments about abolishing corporate welfare. Whether or not you agree with abortion or not, to me, Planned Parenthood should not be getting taxpayer dollars. Just as a corporation, Planned Parenthood should not be getting taxpayer dollars, period, just like any other corporation. I disagree with the witch hunt that the Republicans in Madison went on after Planned Parenthood. As much as I abhor abortion, they shouldn't be going on political witch hunts like these. But, again, they shouldn't be getting taxpayer dollars, and that's just my bottom line on the issue.
Okay, and why? Because you
Just
view it as corporate welfare?
Yes, their CEO makes over $500,000 a year. No CEO should be getting $500,000 a year of taxpayer subsidized money, period. That's unacceptable to me.
Okay. As we tape this show on October 20th, it's actually today is the 5-year anniversary of the slaughter of intentionally released exotic animals in Zanesville, Ohio. That was one of the most shocking animal incidents in the last 25 years. Ohio belatedly took action to restrict private ownership of exotics in the wake of that incident. But 5 years later, there are still 5 states, Wisconsin being one of them, that has done nothing to restrict private ownership of tigers, lions, and you probably thought I was going to say bears, but I'm not. Lions, tigers, bears could be in there, and other large, powerful predatory animals, or any kind of exotic pet, really. I don't care if it's a snake that's not indigenous to Wisconsin. We heard about kangaroos down near the Milwaukee or Madison area in this last year, crocodiles, what have you. Wisconsin, like I said, is one of the 5. And if elected, what will you do to protect exotic animals and prohibit their being allowed to be kept as pets?
Well, I don't think they should be prohibited from being pets. I mean, people need to be responsible with these animals, and if they're not responsible with them, they have to be taken away. But most pet owners are responsible. I've got a lot of friends who are active in the fight to allow reptiles, non-indigenous snakes that aren't dangerous to anybody, but usually municipalities have a 3-foot rule or something like that. And Oshkosh is incredibly strict, not that they actually follow those rules. I mean, in Oshkosh, you can't have more than 5 cats, 3 dogs, or a combination of the 2, or 3 chickens and fish. That's all you can legally have in Oshkosh. Everything else is covered under some, if it can be found in the wild, then you can't have it. So you can't even have a rabbit or a ferret, apparently. But I've got a lot of friends that are active in this fight, and I think they have the moral high ground here. Nobody's being harmed by somebody owning a small mini boa constrictor, whatever. They only get to 6 feet or whatever they are. I'm not too big on the information specifics about these animals, but they're not hurting anybody, and they shouldn't be prohibited from having these as pets.
What about tigers? What about kangaroos? What about crocodiles? I mean, it's not good for the animals either. This is an animal rights issue as well.
Well, I mean, is owning a dog good for the animal?
Yes,
it's like any.
it is.
Well, compared to just releasing it into the wild, but
Well,
when we domesticate it in the
I will
first
argue the
place.
point that a dog is much safer for society than a crocodile. We've seen instances where these animals get loose, they harm people in the general public, and then it's always the animal that pays the price, always. And that's not right. So you agree that you feel that this is not an issue where we need to take a stand, even though 45 other states have.
No, I don't.
Okay. Gordon?
Well, this is one where we actually, and I'm a co-sponsor of the bill, Senator Wangard from Racine was taking the lead, and the Humane Society and some other groups really had highlighted exactly what you said, that Wisconsin's way behind on this. And unfortunately, the bill got watered down considerably, and it didn't move forward. Sometimes it's because you have an advocate for one group over another, but I don't want there to be an incident like there was in Ohio. And of course, we don't know what people have, but the idea, it's not cool to have a tiger at your tattoo parlor or in your basement or at Sawdust Days in a box. Or to have, last year we had the therapy kangaroo that was at McDonald's in Beaver Dam. I don't think a therapy kangaroo should be at McDonald's in Beaver Dam or in someone's basement. It should be in the wild. And I do think we have an obligation to some of these animals to have a humane standard, and I do think there's a distinction we can make with reptiles and other things, and everybody's going to be somewhere on the spectrum in terms of where they want to treat the animal kingdom, but because we have had the situation in Ohio was crazy, and you're right, and at the end of the day they had to kill them. We don't want to wait for that, and I appreciate you bringing up this issue because it doesn't get enough attention, but I think if more people were aware that we don't have it, I think the majority of people would agree that there should be some reasonable standard about, what and how you can have something.
Well, what he said about none of us are going to agree on where we all feel about the animal kingdom and what part of the animal kingdom should be pets and not pets. And that's part of the problem. We're never going to agree because of that, I don't feel like picking an arbitrary spot in the sand and sticking our foot down, and anybody that falls on the wrong side gets screwed. I don't think that's the right approach to go about this. We're never going to agree, and that's the problem. It's subjective. It's not objective.
But you have to have legislation somewhere. I mean, is the libertarian view that we just should not have government intervention much at all?
Yes. The libertarian view is that we shouldn't make arbitrary judgments about what is or isn't acceptable behavior based on what might happen, but based on what has happened. If you harm somebody, if you create a victim, if you do something bad to somebody, you need to be held accountable for that. But if you haven't done that, and if you haven't put anybody in substantial risk of harm, then whatever your actions are, whether they're potentially harmful to yourself or not, and whether they're morally reprehensible or not, shouldn't be prohibited or regulated. This is our view.
Okay, all right. I want to talk about gun control. And Jordan, your website says that you not only fully support the Second Amendment, but you would support campus carry legislation in Wisconsin if you're elected. I'd like to hear a little bit more about that because I'm not that familiar with it. And then I want to give Gordon a chance to weigh in on that. And then I'd like to hear what each of you feels, we need to do to kind of get a handle on some of this gun violence that we've seen going on and we continue to hear about practically every night in the news, and some of this mass violence that we have related to guns. So let's hear about campus carry.
Well, campus carry is simply changing the laws to allow students and faculty and staff and others to legally carry a concealed weapon on campus, on university campuses. I think this is a no-brainer. I mean, it's no different than the grocery store or anywhere else that I go on a day-to-day basis where I can carry, except that when I'm in a classroom with one door and 3 stories below the window I can't open, trapped in there should something go awry, and I don't want to fearmonger, but it happens, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. I'm not allowed to carry in there. I'm not allowed to protect myself, and I don't see why a university classroom should be any different than Walmart.
Would it be, is it concealed carry?
It'd be concealed carry, yes.
Okay, all right. Gordon?
I think this is one of the issues that certainly isn't going to help things. I mean, the author of the bill in Wisconsin said, along the lines of, well, if there's an incident going down, we want as many bullets flying in the air to make sure that we can stop this guy. Good luck when the police show up if we've got, multiple people, shooting things. And, I don't think it's going to be a deterrent, but and certainly campuses should be able to provide a safe environment where students and faculty and staff don't have to worry about everybody on edge, packing heat, especially when, we see enough incidences of people, acting maybe before thinking with firearms.
Mm-hmm. So 2 years ago, I was a junior at UW Oshkosh when the stabbing spree was happening off campus, people being robbed. It was, quite frankly, terrifying to walk home from class or the library after dark. Somebody was stabbed blocks from my house where I was sleeping. 2 people were attacked within about 75 yards of where I was sleeping at the time on separate occasions. And that was, quite frankly, terrifying. And there wasn't a damn thing any of us could do about it. Mm-hmm. We were helpless. We could call for a safe walk, but there weren't as many cops as people calling for safe walks at that time. What I was going to do was sit at the library for half an hour, 45 minutes, waiting for a safe walk. Why couldn't I legally defend myself walking home from class? It was absolutely ridiculous. And unfortunately, people got hurt. I can't say that allowing campus carry would have prevented any of those, but it wouldn't have made it worse. It would have given somebody a chance at least. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a lot better than doing nothing.
Okay, all right. We've seen recent cases where jails or prisons are becoming more violent with corrections officers being hurt, stabbed, shot, having water thrown on them, and scalding water and so forth. Do we need a change in some of our state laws in order to better protect those who are working in these facilities, trying to keep not just the inmates safe, but the rest of society safe as well? Gordon?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, the first thing we need to do is, I mean, what we're seeing in our prisons right now and at Winnebago Mental Health, quite frankly, is unacceptable. We have massive worker shortage, a lot of it caused by Act 10. We have less safe conditions, a lot of it caused by Act 10. I mean, they used to bargain for staffing ratios for, when a post has to collapse, how they have to respond. And increasingly, because there's been such a shortage, we are risking the lives, really. I mean, I have correction officers say nothing's going to change until someone gets killed, whether it's an inmate, or a staff. And it's happening all too frequently, and it's been increasing largely because of the changes we've seen in the last 5 years. Now, without Act 10, we would still be having a challenge with the demographics going forward, but it's been accelerated because people have left, and the turnover is so high, and you've got people working 16 hours in a row, going home for 8 hours, coming back and being forced overtime another 16 hours, and that's not safe. And the response from the Department of Corrections right now is to provide, a little bit of a pay bump, for starting pay. But I mean, the reality is we owe it. We're locking these people up, and we're asking these people to work in these institutions. They should have some guarantee of a safe working place, and right now they don't. And I don't know how much it's going to cost to be able to fill the positions that they need to, but if you remember, the argument for Act 10 was that we are going to reduce overtime costs, and I can tell you we are spending a record level of overtime. I mean, and it kind of exposes the folly of this decision. So, talk to these men and women. I mean, they're at their wits' end. I mean, at Winnebago, I want to bring them because they don't receive the attention, but I can tell you the burnout of people that are in that situation where you have 16 hours, home for 8 hours, working 16 hours again, that we're asking to provide 1-to-1 or 2-to-1 acute care for someone on a civil commitment is, we're requiring them to do that, but we're asking for, unreasonable, workloads.
Jordan?
Well, I mean, if we could start by getting the 4,600 nonviolent offenders out of our prisons, we could close a facility or two and spread the workload around more, and we could alleviate that the worker shortage in our prisons. But going beyond that, the problems with some of the violence in our prisons are being caused by the fact that we treat inmates like criminals. Of course, the criminals, we treat them like monkeys. We throw them in a cage, we throw away the key, and we pretend they're never going to return to society and that they're just filthy animals. And I think we need to change the way we look at prisons, and it shouldn't be about getting even, or it should be about trying to fix them, reform them. They're going to most of them are going to return to society. I mean, there's nothing you can really do about people sitting in supermax for murder for the rest of their lives. But if you're going to return to society, you should be treated like it. We should be helping them, learn skills in prison. It doesn't do any good letting them sit there, and what are they going to do when they sit there? They're going to become violent. They have nothing else to do.
I have to disagree. I know I'm not running here, but I have to take exception with that argument, and I'm sorry. They're not treated like monkeys, and they're not just sitting there in cages. They have cable TV in a lot of the jails. I don't know about the prison system, but I can tell you without reservation that they have cable TV in many of the county jails. They have day rooms where they can go and visit with people and watch more television. Some of the juveniles that are incarcerated have video games to play with. They have some of the more modern Xbox type things that are out there, and that's because the feeling is, if they have these things, it'll keep them relaxed, it'll not make them as upset. So some of these people have more in jail than I have in my own home. And that is kind of an outrage. So they're not treated like monkeys sitting in cages. So I'm sorry, I had to interject there on that because that's the point.
But let me mention one thing. One of the things, if you talk to someone who's worked in our institution before truth in sentencing was passed, they'll tell you about the difference between, an inmate in the 90s and an inmate today. When you take away someone's ability to incentive to behave, In other words, before truth in sentencing, you could get out early for good behavior or get out on probation and parole. With truth in sentencing, there was no incentive. You got to serve your whole sentence on the inside, and then you're out. So they'd act out. They'd do whatever they wanted to. They, workers, correction officers said there was a big change in the kind of inmate they got, and they also know now that these guys are under stress, and so that culture exists. In 2009, we passed earned release for nonviolent offenders that allowed people to get out earlier if they, behaved and got ready, did transition programs, did education programs, and then they served the rest of their time on the outside. That got it repealed by Governor Walker in 2011, and I think part of it, the obstacle to corrections reform is that truth in sentencing and being tough but not very smart on crime has been kind of his baby.
What about some of the minimum sentencing guidelines? That's sort of falling in line with the truth in sentencing. Does that need to be looked at anymore, or are we good with that, do you think?
Well, I think no two cases are the same, and I think judicial discretion is, important. And I know sometimes that can be frustrating for some. We agree with one decision, we don't agree with another, but again, it's called corrections because, as Jordan mentioned, something like 96% of the people that are in our prisons now are going to get released someday. And the question I ask is, how do you want them when they get out? Do you want them angry and unable to make a transition to a sustainable community, or do you, want them better likely to succeed? And I realize some aren't going to be in that position, but a lot of the problems that we're having in the criminal justice system and with some of the instances in police departments has to do with the need to, for prosecutorial reform. In other words, there's too much emphasis sometimes on getting a conviction, getting someone locked up, and not enough interest in the truth and what some of the costs and consequences are.
Okay, all right. Mandatory minimum sentencing, Jordan.
I oppose mandatory minimum sentencing. I trust our judges to use their discretion to give a wise sentence. I think that they should be able to take a holistic approach to looking at the crime instead of being forced under the circumstances that you get a guilty verdict from the jury and they're forced to give out sometimes horrendous sentences to people that didn't do a whole lot wrong, or you get oddball cases, like you said. You get really oddball cases sometimes. Somebody sleepwalking does something like that, where they're not a threat to society. Yeah, that's the law. This is what it's got to be. You got to go to prison for 10 years for nothing. And so I oppose mandatory minimum sentencing.
Okay. I know on your website you've got something about repeat offenders, that there's a state statute that increases jail or prison time for repeat offenders, and you wanted to abolish that?
Yeah. We don't have a strict 3 strikes law like some states do, but we do have some repeat offender laws. Basically, repeat offender laws punish you for a made-up crime that you didn't commit, the crime of committing another crime more than once. You just invent something that you've done now, and they add it on. And I think every crime should be looked at individually instead of looking at your past. It's causing our prisons to fill up faster than they should, among other things. I don't think it's fair, legally fair, to people that are convicted, and I think it's a moral problem.
Okay. Mandatory minimum sentencing?
Again, I echo that. Like I said before, I believe in judicial discretion, and I think we need to be very careful about every time we have a new felony proposed now, the debate is getting better, and there's members of both sides that are saying, well, is this going to be used, even if it's something you think, is a pretty significant crime, is this going to be used, to lock somebody up because it's a tool available in the slew of maybe crimes that someone committed. On the reoffending issue, like drunk driving, for instance. That's always a tough one because you're not going to treat someone's 5th offense like their 1st offense.
Sure.
If we're ultimately trying to, keep the public safe by getting that person off the streets.
Okay. We're down to like 4 minutes yet. So in the last 3 minutes or so here, I kind of want to talk about same-sex marriage. It's legal now here, and yet we still have a state statute that defines marriage as between a man and a woman. Do we need to look at bringing that in line with what the law of the land is now in view of what the United States Supreme Court has ruled?
I think so, and I'm going to have to think about how, if we're going to amend the Constitution, we probably need to have another, vote to do so. And I think polls have showed that, like a lot of, parts of the country, we've had a change in opinion since 2006. I don't think there's been a lot of interest, by people in Madison, but yeah, I think this is, it'll be a pox on our state constitution for some time.
Well, I think so, because it makes sense. I mean, otherwise you've got a state statute that says you're breaking a law,
Right.
and you've got a federal thing that says you're not. Your position on that?
I mean, flag burning laws are still on the books in most states, including Wisconsin, despite the federal level. But as far as same-sex marriage goes, I don't think the state should even be defining marriage. State shouldn't care whether you're married or not or who you're married to. Alabama did the right thing for the wrong reason. Despite gay people, if this is the wrong reason, despite gay people, they said, all right, we're not going to issue marriage licenses. Go get a lawyer, write your own marriage contract, and go to a priest, and you can get married on your own. The state doesn't care anymore. They did it for the wrong reasons, but they did the right thing. Why does the government need to care who's marrying who? This is between me and my spouse. And God, if that's your choice. It shouldn't be between you and your spouse and the state. You shouldn't have to ask permission to get married, no matter whether you're two men, two women. It shouldn't matter. So
Okay.
just getting marriage out of the state shouldn't be involved at all.
Okay, all right. We've got a little extra time, so Jordan, you're the challenger. Why don't you take 30 seconds, look into camera 3 here, and tell folks why they should vote for you.
All right, well, I'm asking for your vote because I want to fight for liberty. I'm the outsider. I'm new to politics, and I don't want to be a career politician. I want to be there for 4 terms at the most, and then I'm done forever with politics. I want to fight for freedom. I want to fight for your freedom. Whatever it is that's important to you, freedom-wise, whatever freedom means to you, I want to fight for that. I want to fight for everybody's freedom. So.
Okay, very good. Gordon, your camera is number 1.
All right. Well, I'm Gordon Hintz, and I'm asking for your vote on November 8th, so I continue to be an advocate for the Oshkosh community and be a voice for opportunity throughout the state of Wisconsin. Over the last 5 terms, I've done my best to work with the city, the county, the school district, and the public while being responsive to people's concerns, and to do everything I can at the state level to support initiatives that we are doing at the local level. I just want to say that I know it's a frustrating time and a lot of people are cynical about our elections, and I think we do have too much money in our system, but the public has the ability to participate and to vote and to reject that kind of politics. And I'm asking for your vote on November 8th.
All right, very good. Thanks to each of you. That's going to do it for us. Thanks again to our guests tonight, thanks to the crew, and thanks to you. We'll see you next time. Go vote on or before November 8th, and we'll see you next time. Until then, take care. Keep your eye on us. We've got our eye on Oshkosh.